This morning, I would like to look at hormones and behavior. And this is a little different than my normal presentations. I'm looking more into root causes and lifestyle and more of a treatment standpoint. But this morning, I'd like to look a little more at physiology, hormones and behavior patterns. Is this anybody that might be you or someone else you know? My hormones are making me crazy. Do you know that person? Or do you ever feel that way yourself? Well, what's the root cause? What is going on? And that's what I'd like to take a look at this morning is what is the root cause? If I have it's hard to hog tie me, y'all. I like to move around. If you have a piece of sandpaper and I'm rubbing my arm, what's going to happen to it? I'm going to wear the skin off of it. I'm going to take the hide off. And if you come up to me, ma'am, and you say, honey, let me put some medicine on it, and you put the medicine on it, and then you leave, and I go to rubbing it again. And you come back in, you put more medicine on it, and I go to rubbing it again, and is it going to heal? It will not. We've got to get rid of the root cause. And many times in healthcare, we mask and we manage, and we don't get to root cause. And this morning, I'd like to look at, is there some issues of root cause amongst this issue? Well, let's go to the University of or Ohio State University and look to see what they have to say on this subject. The study at hand is called Behavioral Endocrinology, which is the scientific study of the interaction between hormones and behavior. This interaction is bidirectional. Now, what's it mean, bidirectional? Hormones can influence behavior, and behavior can influence hormone concentrations. Behavioral endocrinologists are interested in the general physiological effects of hormones. The general physiological effects of hormones alter the development and expression of behavior and how behavior influences the effects of hormones. And that's what we're going to take a look at here. To understand the hormone-behavior relationship, it is important briefly to describe hormones. And there's many kinds of hormones, but we're going to look more at specific hormones this morning. Hormones are organic chemical messengers produced and released by special glands called endocrine glands. Now, it's not just the endocrine glands that produce hormones. There's some other tissues, but we're going to speak of these specifically this morning. Hormones are released from these glands into the blood where they may travel to act on target structures, and that's very important to understand. So as they go through the system, they're looking for target structures at some distance from their origin. Hormones are similar in function to neurotransmitters, the chemicals used by the nervous system in coordinating activities. However, hormones can operate over a greater distance and over a much greater temporal range than neurotransmitters. Examples of hormones that influence behavior include steroid hormones such as testosterone, estradiol, progesterone, and cortisol. There's also protein or peptide small protein hormones, oxytocin, vasopressin, prolactin, and leptin. Not all cells are influenced by each and every hormone. That's another important factor to take a look at. Not all cells are influenced by the specific hormones. Rather, any given hormone can directly influence only cells which have specific hormone receptors. And we'll talk a little bit more about the receptors in a little bit. That for that particular hormone, cells that have these specific receptors are called target cells for the hormones. Now, when I work with diabetes, when I worked my first 20 years in healthcare, we never reversed diabetes. Not one care plan ever said reversal of diabetes. It was diabetic management through pharmaceuticals. And the only way we found to get rid of the diabetes, I went to a place that we had over a 98% reversal rate of type 2 diabetes, and that's where we got to the specific issue of the insulin receptors. We had to go straight to the issues, find out what was going on, and correct that problem. And that's what we're we're looking at here. The interaction of a hormone with its receptor begins a series of cellular events that eventually lead to the activation of enzymatic pathways or altering, turning on, or turns off gene activation that regulates protein synthesis. The newly synthesized proteins may activate or deactivate other genes, causing yet another cascade of cellular events. Importantly, sufficient numbers of appropriate hormones receptors must be available for a specific hormone to produce any effect. Again, we're looking at root cause. What's the problem? What's going on? So what happens here? Sufficient numbers of appropriate hormone receptors must be available for a specific hormone to produce any effect. And we'll talk about that in testosterone. Thank you, sir. See if that stays. For example, testosterone is important for male sexual behavior. If men have too little testosterone, then sexual motivation may be low. And it can be restored by testosterone treatment. And we'll talk about that tomorrow. I hope y'all, who else is going to be here tomorrow? I don't see everybody's hands raised. I hope you'll be here tomorrow. Tomorrow, it's more my comfort zone where I'm going to get into the natural remedy aspect of it. What can we do for testosterone? I have guys that come in and they'll ask for something, they get it, and then they will they'll take it, their testosterone comes up, their energy comes back, and then I don't see them for a while. And then who comes up? The wife. The wife comes and she says, "What did you give Henry? It worked, and he doesn't have the energy he had before around the house. I want to buy it for him because I got work to be done." And so there's things that you can do, and we'll talk about that tomorrow. So, for example, testosterone is important for male sexual behavior. If men have too little testosterone, it's not just for sexual behavior, it's also for strength and many things, then sexual motivation may be low, and it can be restored by testosterone treatment. However, if men have normal or even elevated levels of testosterone, yet display low sexual drive or no energy, then it might be possible for lack of receptors to be the cause, and the treatment with additional hormones will not be effective. Very important to take a look at. So again, we've got to look at root cause, not just throwing something at it. Even though it's natural, just don't throw it at it. We've got to see what's really going on. The challenge with hormones, and this is another thing, I put it in red. The challenge with hormones is that a little bit goes a long way. Because of this, minor changes in levels can cause significant changes in your body and lead to certain conditions that require treatment. I remember a lady came to me one time and she said, "My boyfriend and I were going over to Gatlinburg to spend the week together." And she said, "It's the wrong time for this to be going on. Can you give me something to change what's going on?" Well, first of all, it's her and her boyfriend, but I said, "No, you just don't go messing with that kind of stuff." You know what I'm saying? God has a certain rhythm going on, and I don't want, yes, there's something that we could use, but if you give something, it may throw your whole system off, and then you're like that first lady going, "Ah." And so it's important to be careful with hormone changes. How do hormones affect behavior? It is important to note that hormones do not cause behavioral changes. Rather, hormones influence systems so that specific stimuli are more likely to elect certain responses in appropriate behavior or social context. In other words, hormones change the probability that a particular behavior will be emitted in the appropriate situation. We can apply this behavioral scheme in a simple behavior, the singing of zebra finches. And I'll look at some examples there with the animal kingdom as we look at comparing with humans. And we see that in science a lot. We use mice and rats and different animals to do study on. Only male zebra finches sing. If the testes of adult male finches are removed, then the birds reduce singing. But castrated finches resume singing if the testes are reimplanted. It's interesting, I was looking at Reuters, and Reuters was giving a report just recently of where a physician went in, a male went in, 25 years of age, and he was having some issues with one of his testicles, and the wrong one was removed. Not good, because the other one was bad. And so the physician in surgery realized he made a mistake, sent him off to a microsurgeon who reattached the testicle, and everything was fine. So you can reattach testicles. But castrated finches resume singing if the testes are reimplanted or if the birds are treated with either testosterone or estradiol. So the hormones is affecting the behavior. How might behaviors affect hormones? The bird singing example demonstrates how hormones can affect behavior, but as noted, the reciprocal relation also occurs. That is, behavior can affect hormone concentrations. So hormones can affect behavior, but behavior can affect hormone concentrations. And we'll talk a little deeper here. For example, a sight of a territorial intruder may elevate blood testosterone concentrations in resident male birds and thereby stimulate singing or fighting behavior. Similarly, male mice or monkeys that lose a fight decrease circulating testosterone concentrations for several days or even weeks thereafter. So what happens? You've got this monkey, he loses a fight, and his testosterone level goes down for how long? Could be several weeks. That's important to take a look at here. Comparable results have been reported in humans. Testosterone concentrations are affected not only in humans involved in physical combat, but also in those involved in simulated battles. Do Americans do they get involved in simulated battles? I was traveling from somewhere, I was probably Atlanta, I'm pretty sure it was Atlanta, and I was going out to the West Coast, and this has been several years ago. And I always sit towards the back of the airplane. I fly a lot, and in case it crashes, if you sit in the back, they say you have the greatest chances, even though probability is still pretty low. But anyway, I'm a fire chief, and so I'm always looking at probability of safety, and I count. When I get in the airplane, last night I was flying, I flew in 2 planes, and each time I counted how many rows forward, how many rows backward was the exit door in case something happened that I couldn't see, and I had to crawl and get to an exit. That's just a firefighter thinking. Anyway, let me come back. So I'm traveling to the West Coast, and I'm sitting there towards the back in the aisle seat, and there's a guy sitting in front of me 1 row across the way, and he's sitting there going across the United States on his little Mac computer, and he's playing games, these warlike games. I mean, he had his knife, and he was cutting people and killing people and blowing people up, and he'd get blown up. And do you think that can affect hormones? Absolutely, that's what it says. It says even simulated battles can affect hormones. For example, testosterone concentrations were evaluated in winners and reduced in losers of regional chess tournaments. Again, let's read that. Testosterone concentrations were evaluated in winners and reduced losers of regional chess tournaments. The effects even go further. The expectation of events can influence one's hormonal activities. So if you're expecting something to happen, can that affect your hormones? Yes, it can. It sure can. So let's look. People do not have to be directly involved in the contest to have their hormones affected by the outcomes of the contest. Male fans of a Brazilian and Italian teams were recruited to provide saliva samples to be assessed for testosterone before and after the final game of the World Cup soccer match in 1994. Brazil and Italy were tied going into the final game, but Brazil won on a penalty kick at the last possible moment. The Brazilian fans were elated, and the Italian fans were crestfallen. Now, if any of y'all ever get involved in sports, I used to be very involved in sports, competitive sports. Then I found there's some issues with that. But anyway, did you get involved if you lost a game? Do you remember that when you were involved in competitive sports? Yes. So when the samples were, again, tested, 11 of 12 Brazilian fans who were sampled had increased testosterone concentrations. And 9 of 9 Italian fans had decreased testosterone concentrations compared with pre-game baseline values. What do you think happened last weekend in Tuscaloosa, Alabama? What happened last weekend in Tuscaloosa, Alabama? Anybody know? Well, that's probably a good thing. Tennessee played Alabama. In Tennessee and Alabama, things just don't go well between those two. Alabama won. What do you think what happened to Alabama's testosterone that night? What do you think happened with Tennesseans' testosterone that night? Even those that were not in Tuscaloosa, that were watching wherever across the United States, what happened to their testosterone? Alabama, or Bama, as they would say, Bama fans, it went up or down? It went up. Tennessee fans, Vol fans, it went down. Is it important what goes into our mind? What we see, what we hear, what we think. Is testosterone important? It is. Hormones can be affected by anticipation of behavior. Now, for us, this is not rocket science, y'all. This is just plumb horse sense. Y'all know what horse sense is? I came off a farm. Horse sense is common sense, and we know this, but here's some science behind it. For example, testosterone concentrations also influence sexual motivation and behavior in women. In one study, the interaction between sexual relations and testosterone was compared with other activities, such as cuddling or exercise in women. In a study on 3 separate occasions, women provided a pre-activity, post-activity, and next morning saliva samples. After analysis, the women's testosterone was determined to be elevated prior to sexual relations as compared to other times. Thus, the anticipatory relations exist between sexual behavior and testosterone. Testosterone values were high post-sexual relations compared to exercise, suggesting that engaging in sexual behavior also influences hormone concentrations in ladies. Just horse sense. Sex differences. Roosters and hens are different. We talked about chickens last night, didn't we, on the way back to the motel? Yes. Who's ever had chickens? I've had chickens. Yes, my granddaughter, she has chickens. She's 8 now, but ever since she could walk, she would go, and she has a little business of collecting eggs and takes care of her chickens. And Rebecca can very quickly tell you that there's a big difference between roosters and chickens. Would you agree? Yes. How about cows? I grew up on a farm. We had dairy cows, we had beef cows. There's a huge difference between bulls and cows. Not just a bull is big and can kill you if he's upset at you. A cow can kill you too. But that bull is very strong. But there's also other issues that are different. So there's a huge difference between bulls and cows. Lions and lionesses are different. It's interesting when I go to Africa. And I talk a lot about stress. I talk about fight or flight. And here in the United States, I talk about running from the bear. Well, in Africa, they had no idea what bears were, but they knew what lions were. So when I'm in Africa, I talk about running from the lions. But there's a big difference between a lion and a lioness. Or how about, is there sexual differences between men and women? Or even boys and girls are different. Y'all have had children, understand that. Grandchildren, you understand that. Aunts, uncles. Humans, like many animals, are sexually dimorphic. Diatomorphic. Morph type, or 2 types, in the size, shape of their bodies, their physiology, And for our purpose, the behavior. And I would add anatomy. Would you agree? Absolutely. The behavior of boys and girls differs in many ways. Girls generally excel in verbal abilities relative to boys. Boys are nearly twice as likely as girls to suffer from dyslexia, reading difficulties, and stuttering, and nearly 4 times more likely to suffer from autism. Boys are generally better than girls at tasks that require visuospatial abilities. Girls engage in nurturing behaviors more frequently than boys, and that's a good thing. You know, I truly believe, and maybe it's just I'm just no Southern boy. Men got a responsibility, ladies have a responsibility. And my daddy would tell me many nights growing up, son, someday you will have a wife and you'll have children, and this is what I expect you to do. And the ladies tell the young ladies in the South, you have a responsibility. And we all are very important. And we have to work together with those 2 different God-given abilities. But here, where it talks about that nurturing behavior, my wife will tell you very quickly, I'm not that nurturing. Let's get it done. But she has that nurturing behavior that I don't have. More than 90% of all anorexia nervosa cases involve young women. Young men are twice as likely as a young woman to suffer from schizophrenia. Boys are much more aggressive and generally engage in more rough and tumble play than girls. And not saying that girls they're not tom girls and have rough and play. My granddaughter, Adeline. Now, Adeline is 5. Her brother, Kyler, is 8. And Adeline, she'll jump off the couch and tackle him. She'll run, whatever. But let me tell you what, she's still a girly girl. Many sex differences, such as the difference in aggressiveness, persist throughout adulthood. For example, there are many more men than women serving prison sentences for violent behavior. And you know, I'm seeing, as being in the fire department, there's a lot of closeness between us and law enforcement and us having to respond together. I'm seeing that raising in ladies. They're not young ladies. They're not ladies. There's more violent behavior. The hormonal differences between men and women account for adult sex differences that develop during puberty. But what accounts for behavioral sex differences among children prior to puberty and activation of their gonads? Hormone secretions from the development of gonads determine whether the individual develops a male or female manner. So where is that determined? From the gonads. And male gonad is the testicle, produces sperm. Female gonad is the ovary, produces egg cells. Male behavior requires exposure to androgens during gestation in order to masculinize the brain. Male behavior requires exposure to androgens during gestation in order to masculinize the brain, and also requires androgens during or after puberty to activate these neural circuits. Typical female behavior requires a lack of exposure to androgens early in life, which leads to feminization of the brain, and also requires estrogens to activate these neural circuits in adulthood. There's chemistry there, there's science there, there's physiology there. If you walk through any major toy store, then you will likely observe a couple of aisles filled with pink boxes and the complete absence of pink packages of toys in adjacent aisles. Remarkably, you will also see a strong self-segregation of boys and girls in these aisles. It is rare to see boys in the pink aisles and vice versa. It says rare, not totally. The toy manufacturers are often accused of making toys that are gender biased, but it seems more likely that boys and girls enjoy playing with specific types and colors of toys. Indeed, toy manufacturers would immediately double their sales if they could sell toys of both sexes, or to both sexes. Boys generally prefer toys such as trucks and balls, and girls generally prefer toys such as dolls. although it is doubtful that there are genes that encode preferences for toys, cars, or trucks on the Y chromosome, it is possible that hormones might shape the development of a child's brain to prefer certain types of toys or styles of play behavior. Is the behavior just a learned behavior? This is interesting. A study of vervet monkeys calls into question the primacy of learning in the establishment of toy preferences. Female vervet monkeys prefer girl-type toys, such as dolls or cooking pots, whereas male vervet monkeys preferred boy-type or boy-typical toys, such as cars and balls. There were no sex differences in preference for gender-neutral toys, such as picture books or stuffed animals. So for those neutral ones, both sexes we saw similarity there. Presumably, monkeys have no prior concept of boy or girl toys. Young russet monkeys also had similar toy preferences. What then underlies the sex differences in toy preferences? So where is this coming about? Is it hormones? Is it behavior? Is it environment? Let's look. It is possible that certain attributes of toys or objects appeal to either boys or girls. Toys that appeal to boys or male vervet or racing monkeys, in this case, a ball or a toy car, are objects that can be moved actively through space, toys that can be incorporated into active rough tumble play. The appeal of toys that girls or female vervet monkeys prefer appears to be based on color. Pink and red, the colors of the doll and the pot, may provoke attention to infants. Now, you say, well, it's only because grandma bought, or mother bought, whatever toy for the little girl, or granddad bought, or dad bought whatever ball or whatever for the little boy. But let's go back further. Society may reinforce such stereotypical response to gender-typical toys. The sex difference in toy preferences emerge by 12 or 24 months of age and seems to be fixed at 36 months of age. And it's interesting, they tell us that our character, a child's character, is set at 36 months, around 3 years of age. Very, very important. So as Johnny's running around, he's not polite, he's not obeying, he's not saying yes, sir, and no, sir, as we say in the South. Oh, he'll just learn when he gets older. But 3 years of age is very, very important in setting of character. So obedience is important all the way up. But are sex differences in toy preferences present during the first year of life? It is difficult to ask preverbal infants what they prefer. But in studies where the investigators examined the amount of time that babies looked at different toys, eye tracking data, indicated that infants as young as 3 months showed sex difference in toy preferences. So that's not a case of, that's just in that child. The little girl is looking at pink. The little boy is spending more time looking at the ball or the truck. Girls preferred dolls, whereas boys preferred trucks at 3 months of age. Another result that suggested that hormones are involved in toy preferences is the observation that girls diagnosed with congenital adrenal hyperplasia, whose adrenal glands produce various amounts of androgens early in life, played with masculine toys more often than girls without CAH. Further, a dose-response relationship between the event or extent of the disorder, the degree of fetal androgen exposure, and the degree of masculinity play behavior was observed. Again, we're looking at hormones here. Sex differences are common in humans and in animals because males and females differ in the ratio of androgenic and estrogenic steroid hormone concentrations. Behavioral endocrinologists have been particularly interested in the extent to which behavior sex differences are mediated by hormones. The process of becoming female or male is called sexual differentiation. The primary step in sexual differentiation occurs at fertilization. In mammals, the ovum, which always contains an X chromosome, can be fertilized by a sperm bearing either Y or X chromosomes. This process is called sex determination. One of my ladies who comes to see me, she was telling me, and she said she's a nurse, and she went to UT, University of Tennessee in Knoxville, and she had a baby, and the nurse comes in, the baby had been taken back to the nursery, and the nurse comes in and says, is it a boy or do you want it to be a girl? And my nurse friend looked at the nurse and said, you took nursing, you took anatomy, go back and look. Gonadal steroid hormones have organizing effects upon brain and behavior. The organizing effects of steroid hormones are relatively concentrated in early ages of development. Exposure to testosterone, which is converted into estradiol, or estradiol causing masculinization of the brain. Sex differences in human brain size have been reported for years. Sex differences in human brain size has been reported for years. More recently, sex differences in spatial brain structures have been discovered. Sex differences in a number of cognitive functions have also been reported. Females are generally more sensitive to auditory information, whereas males are more sensitive to visual information. That's just horse sense, y'all. Females are also typically more sensitive than males to taste and olfactory input. That's what you smell. When women display less lateralization of cognitive functions than men. On average, females generally excel in verbal, perceptual, and fine motor skills, whereas males outperform females in quantitative and visual spatial tasks, including map reading and direction finding. It is important to note that there is more variation within each sex than between the sexes for most cognitive abilities. So there's differentiation, the big differences between males and females within those specific areas than between males and females of the areas. The possibility for male aggressive behaviors exists whenever the interests of two or more individuals are in conflict. Conflicts are more likely to arise over limited resources such as territories, food, and mates. There is overwhelming evidence that androgenic steroid hormones mediate aggressive behavior. First, seasonal variations in blood plasma concentrations of testosterone and seasonal variations in aggression coincide. Second, aggressive behaviors increase at the time of puberty when the testes become active and blood concentrations of androgens rise. Third, in any given species, males are generally more aggressive than females. And there's no question, I'm seeing more and more aggression in females out there today. And why is that? And maybe I'm definitely more exposed to the South, and where, young ladies are supposed to act like a young lady, and young men are supposed to act like a young man. Man can stand up for himself. But our culture's changing. And why is our culture changing? It's changing because of a number of things. I think we're seeing changes in people moving into our area with different philosophies. I see changes in just spirituality, huge difference in spirituality in the South, which the South is the Bible Belt. But I see, as I go out into factories and I do a questionnaire, and as I look at spirituality, what I saw 20 years ago is significantly different in spirituality from what I see today in the Bible Belt. And so I believe that's an issue. Finally, castration typically reduces aggression in males, and testosterone replacement therapy restores aggression to pre-castration levels. As mentioned, males are generally more aggressive than females. In general, human males are much more aggressive than females. Many more men than women are convicted of violent crimes in North America. Sex differences in human aggressive behavior vary early. At every age throughout the school years, many more boys than girls initiate physical assaults. But I'm seeing more and more girls doing physical assault. They're not acting like young ladies. Now, I'm speaking from the South. And in the South, girls, ladies are supposed to act like ladies. But I'm seeing that change. And so it's not just a hormone issue. I believe environmental can be significantly effective on that change. Assigning a cause to behavioral sex differences in humans also always elicit much debate. First, it is possible that boys are more aggressive than girls because of androgens promote aggressive behavior, and boys have higher blood concentrations of androgens than girls. Second, it is possible that boys and girls differ in their aggressiveness because the brains of boys are exposed to androgens potentially, and the wiring of their brains is thus organized in the way that facilitates the expression of aggression. Third, it is also possible that boys are encouraged and girls are discouraged by family, peers, and others from acting in an aggressive behavior, and that's what I was speaking of earlier. How many of y'all remember the song Frankie and Johnny Were Sweethearts? Anybody remember that song? Frankie and Johnny were sweethearts. Okay, well, what happened was it was in North Carolina, and Frankie and Johnny were sweethearts, but then what happened was Frankie and Johnny just didn't get along too well. And so Frankie killed Johnny, chopped him up, and she then got caught, and she got taken down off the mountain, from Michaelville down off the mountain into the valley. This is pre-Civil War days. And there was a huge difference, even today, in mountain folks and flatlander folks. And so she was tried in the court, which the county at that time, the county seat was in, don't remember the name of the town. We call it Crazy Town. There's a mental hospital there. And she was tried there in that town. Well, the jurors were from flatlanders, and ladies were to be ladies. But then after the Civil War, up on the mountain, they changed counties, and they say if she had been tried up on the mountain, she would have been probably not convicted to hang, because the mountain ladies were a little more aggressive than the ladies down off the mountain where they were supposed to be ladies. Do you want to see what I'm saying? The community definitely affects what's going on here. Fourth, could it be affected by cultural, even spiritual environment? Could it be? Absolutely. Let me close with this. As we look at hormones, yes, hormones are huge, and they have a huge impact. Yes, behavior is an issue, but I want to say environment is an issue that I believe is being ignored. It's huge. You know, in science, we look at health, and we say with health issues, say it's diabetes, it's a cardiovascular disease, or whatever it is. We say genetics loads the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. And let me ask here, could it be the same? Could the issue be here that what's going on around us could be pulling that trigger? And yes, there's genetics. We cannot argue with genetics. But can the environment, living in a home which believes in values, structure, as the doctor talked about this morning, structures of honesty, kindness, can that affect the difference in a home that does not have structure and kindness? I kind of look at it like processors. I've got a Mac. It's got a Mac processor. And then I used to have non-Mac, which had a processor. This guy came to me one time, and I'll finish with a story. This guy came to me one time, and he had a little blender. It's called a bullet. You all know what a bullet blender is? And he was from China, and he wanted me to sell them. And I looked at it, and the cord to it looked real cheesy, like something back in the 60s from Japan. And it just didn't, as a firefighter and a fire chief, I looked at him going, it might catch on fire. And there's no UL label. And he says, what's UL label? And I said, well, UL label is where they've gone and they've tested it and they've evaluated whether or not it would be safe to use. It's a little sticker on there. And he said, no problem, buy sticker. There can be differences in cultural beliefs of one which God says, be honest, to a culture that doesn't have God, and there's not that boundary that you talked about. Can you see that? And so as we look at hormones versus behavior, I encourage you to also look at environment, how that affects the human body.